You have the right to remain silent.
But we'd prefer if you didn't.
Spinning the law, spinning the law.
This is Malzberg's
Spinning the law,
Spinning the Law
spinning the law, spinning the law.
with attorney Kendall Coffey.
All right, folks. Hey, it's always better with a little music and the band playing, isn't it, Kendall?
It is so much better. I love your voice, but that song, Steve, it just launches the segment.
It does. It's like when my son's driving. I'm driving him to his hockey game, and he has the headphones on. He doesn't want to talk to me. He's pumping that music in, and he's getting psyched, and it has the same effect on you. I could tell.
Yeah.
Hayes has found herself by two consecutive congressional committees. One, yesterday, they recommended that the Justice Department investigator, because they say she's committed criminal acts related to the IRS scandal, if you will. And today, the Oversight Committee voted to hold her in contempt of Congress, which they also voted to do to Eric Holder. And now it's up to the rest of the House to vote, and then that would be sent to Eric Holder. So explain, first of all, let's take it one at a time. What does it mean when a committee, votes, the Ways and Means yesterday votes to recommend to the Justice Department that that she committed criminal acts?
Well, a criminal referral by a body of Congress is going to get very serious attention. I mean, no matter what party, what branch of government, something like that simply can't get ignored. So it'll be looked at very, very seriously. And if they decide not to do anything in the end, they'll need to be in a position to really justify that decision, which generally prosecutors don't have to do, Steve. They can, of course, if they bring charges, they got to prove them in court. But if they don't bring charges, then usually there's not too much anybody can say about it. There's not an ability of judges to make them bring charges. So in this situation, coming from the House, they're going to have to do something with the case, or they're going to have to be in a position to explain very convincingly why the House referral did not have enough of a basis. And
then on holding someone in contempt of Congress, I mean, theoretically, they could, if the House votes to go along with it, as an extension from just the committee vote today, could they, if Justice doesn't do anything, could they actually throw her in like the jail in the basement of the Capitol?
Well, they can't throw her in the jail by themselves. They don't have, in effect, the power that a judge has to enforce contempt. They can, in effect, make a declaration of contempt. But what I think would happen next determines that she's in contempt. Then they would ask the Justice Department to enforce that contempt finding. If the Justice Department doesn't, then I think a lot of analysts believe that the House could get their own counsel. They could appoint their own special counsel to represent their interests and go to federal court and ask the federal judge to take the necessary steps that could ultimately lead to incarceration for the violation of the requirement that information be produced, essentially enforcing through court representatives.
All right, now let me ask you this. You and I remember discussing this with you, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. Lois Lerner invoked her Fifth Amendment rights on two occasions, but the first time she did it after she read a nation and addressed the facts one by one, but then said, in answer to questions, I take the Fifth. And there are many who have said that, hey, well, she's, and I don't want to, if my memory serves me right, you did weigh in on this, that she lost her right to invoke the Fifth once she made that opening statement on that very issue. Is that true?
Well, it can be true. A typical lawyer's answer, right? It depends. But if you say things on the specific subject that you want to invoke the Fifth on, then you've heard about the reference to waiver. You can waive or give up rights. So if this goes through and the specific issues end up in front of a judge at some point, a judge could look at what she voluntarily said and say, hey,
that's a waiver.
To the extent that they want to ask you specific questions about what you specifically said, you have waived that. It's a considerable risk, and I think a lot of people would have advised her not even to open her mouth rather than run the risk that somebody might at some point find that she waived some part of her Fifth Amendment rights.
Interesting. All right, let's move on. The Supreme Court heard arguments on the case of the right of a individual business to refrain from paying for the abortion pill or the birth control. Two Christian photographers who in New Mexico refused to photograph the same-sex ceremony. I don't say wedding because there's no same-sex marriage in New Mexico. They refused to photograph that ceremony. They were admonished by the New Mexico Supreme Court, and they also were fined, etc. And the Supreme Court refused to hear that. Now, in the context of they did hear oral arguments on the case I just mentioned, and there are cases pending or will be coming before it, like the nuns who are suing. Should we read anything into them saying, we're not going to hear it?
Well, certainly not read into them that they agreed with the decision. That would be a mistake. And whenever people try to argue that the Supreme Court's decision not to hear a lower court decision.
Why not? Why is that wrong?
Because I think the Supreme Court is very, very cautious about which cases it hears. It doesn't believe it has to right every injustice. They couldn't possibly have enough time to consider and review every case that they might disagree with from the lower courts. What they do is they pick cases with the facts and the timing that allows them to make decisions about the law for all 50 states in the U.S. territories. And if they don't think the time is right, or they think there's issues about the facts in this case that mean it's not the right time or the right group of facts, then they're not going to hear it. But for sure, their decision not to hear something doesn't mean they think the lower court decision was a good idea. In this case, it's a decision that only applies, strictly speaking, in New Mexico. Now, I don't think that means that they're done with the issue. I think the issue can come back in another time in a different set of facts. But because I think that, we talked about this kind of issue coming up in different places, in different states. Mm-hmm. It's an important issue, and I think that at some point in time, the Supreme Court may indeed want to look at this kind of conflict between, issues of discrimination and what appears to be a legitimate religious and faith-based decision. So for now, that conflict isn't resolved. It's in New Mexico. We know what the law is. But for the rest of the country, it'll have to wait.
One more quickly. This NSA surveillance, the victory won by Larry Klayman about the mass collection of phone records. He wanted to expedite it to the Supreme Court, and that's something else the Supreme Court turned away and said, no, let it go through the courts. So no significance there, or in this case, they can't handle every case, so they made that decision. I mean, that's basically what you say anytime the court turns away a case, right?
Yeah, well, this one even more so, because here the case hasn't gone through the mid-level appeals court yet.
Right. So it's rare that they would expedite a case, correct?
Very, very rare that they would expedite it and bypass it. Yeah. This was not surprising at all. The New Mexico case, it's a fair question as to what does it mean when they don't hear that particular case. But with respect to the matter on the NSA, I think the Supreme Court did what they would do almost all the time. Let it go through the federal appeals court before it gets to them, and then decide whether they want to hear that particular fact.
Kendall,
pattern.
Have a great Passover, and I think, and we
have a great holiday season for you as well, Steve.
Okay, we'll speak to you soon. Kendall Coffey, ladies and gentlemen, spitting the law on the Steve Malzberg Show.
We don't just talk about the news, we talk to those making news. This is the Steve Malzberg Show.